Good morning, this is Ryan at xcannabis.com. It is the commodity report. It's belated because it's now Saturday, September 15th, 2012, and I usually do these on Tuesday. But regardless of that, most people aren't listening at 6 in the morning, so this will just be an archive. So enjoy your Tuesday show if you're listening to this on its regular scheduled time. A couple of things that I've been discussing over the last year and a half is this Bitcoin currency, which has only been in existence since February of 2009. I have recently plunged into using Bitcoin with all my might, everything that I've got, which isn't much, but I've started a auction store at bitmit.net. That's bitmit.net. In fact, you can go right to my store if you go to www.slu2.com/SELL. So SLU2.com/sell. And that's our store. We've got a lot of different commodities there, a lot of different products, prepper stuff, camping stuff, knives, survival knives, hunting knives, swords. We've got 300,000 heirloom seed storage seed bank. We got all kinds of stuff there. I'm going to have my hemp soaps there and everything else. But we only take Bitcoin. We don't take any other currency at that store, and that's what we're trying to convert to. Let me explain this a little bit to you, and this is, my main concern is our currency is being deflated at a record amount by the Federal Reserve printing money endlessly. Our Congress has no oversight of the Federal Reserve. We have no authority in our people, our Congress, our elected officials have no control over the Federal Reserve. There's no authority there, and they can continue to print money. And now they're going to buy $40 billion worth of bonds, and the only way they can do that is by printing money that doesn't exist. And every time $1 is printed, that makes the next dollar half as valuable, and or the dollar that existed before it half as valuable. And so every time they print $40 billion, that means the $40 billion we had before that, not that we had it, is worth $20 billion, and and so on and so forth. I mean, it keeps decreasing, keeps deflating, and this is what's happened to currencies over the past. Back in 2010, South Carolina Representative Pitts, what the heck's his name, Mike Pitts, introduced legislation that would mandate gold and silver coins to replace federal currency as legal tender in his state, which is a constitutional thing. I mean, it is found in our Constitution in Section 31 USC subsection 5115 about U.S. state currency notes. And if we go back to the original form of our currency, it was backed by gold and silver, and we had gold and silver notes, and they weren't they weren't even notes. They were they were certificates. They were gold and silver certificates, which means that they had commodities backing them. These notes are basically IOUs that don't have any backing. They're just, hey, I owe you this money, and we're going to continue to print it, and our backing is the interest in which the American people are willing to pay. That interest goes to the central banking system, in large quantities, and then they give some kickbacks to our treasury. But in essence, that those kickbacks don't equal the amount of interest that the American people are charged. So we are indebted from day one. Those who have no wealth, no family assets, those who are born into a middle class or lower middle class or lower class family, we are indebted right now to the tune of whatever our United States debt is, which continues to go up. Right now, each and every man, woman, and child has a debt of $60,000. That's whether you're 1 day old or 100 years old. And I've recently made a lot of different changes in our lifestyle. We've been buying bullion. We've been buying copper bullion right now. I have some silver and gold. Not much, but I try to have an alternate just in case. Just in case our currency deflates, and that's what this lawmaker was trying to do in 2010, which of course it didn't pass, and it's unfortunate that it didn't. But his quote is, I'll read you a little bit of this. In an interview, Pitts told Hotsheet that he believes that if the federal government continues to spend money at the rate it's spending money, and if it continues to print money at the rate it is printing money, our economic system is going to collapse. Quote, the Germans felt their system wouldn't collapse, but it took a wheelbarrow of money to buy a loaf of bread in the 1930s, he said. The Soviet Union didn't think their system would collapse, but it did. Ours is capable of collapsing also. And, with no currency, we got rid of the gold standard in 1971. We have no backing for our currency. We have funny money. And so I've gone over to a different type of funny money, something that has no backing, which is Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is driven by the market. It's decentralized. There's no central bank. There's no central government or authority. This is, driven by the community. It's open source, and it's a form of money that can be traded online or in person. We've got means of doing both, and it's fairly stable. Being such a new currency, since it's only been around for 3 years, a little more than 3 years, it's been very, very stable. And I've watched this over the last year and a half since I got interested in Bitcoin. I've watched it go from $8 to $13 down to $11 per coin. That's right now. In fact, at this very moment, it's worth $11.60 in US dollars. And like I said, at bitmit.net, we've got a little store, and we've actually sold a few things, and we've gotten Bitcoin in exchange. And I haven't bought anything with Bitcoin yet. I've just kind of been gathering it. But I've got an alternate. I don't have to worry about if the Federal Reserve is going to collapse our currency and deflate it so bad that it's not worth anything in the world market, because I've got other alternatives. I've got bullion and I've got Bitcoin. Another concern that I had, and this is cannabis related, is what about these notes that are sanctioned by the federal government and have ties to this Commerce Clause of the federal government. The Commerce Clause is, I don't know a lot about the Commerce Clause, but I think that it's interesting that they regulate our commerce so strictly, and more so because they keep introducing more laws based on that. And that, let me see, that's, what is that, section... Chapter 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. I'm sorry, it's anyway, it is definitely interesting that we've got the Federal Reserve, serial numbers, logos, and the United States government branding and everything else, and then they are saying that due to their, it's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, I apologize, that's the Commerce Clause, and they're saying that, they have the right to regulate even over state law. They can override state law via this article in the Constitution. And in Gonzalez versus Rake, the Supreme Court decision, and that had a lot to do with marijuana. A lot of the marijuana court cases refer to that. But even in that, and in other Supreme Court decisions involving even religion and marijuana, they always trump these things with this Commerce Clause that regulates these type of transactions and others as well. So it concerns me that for these dispensaries especially to be exposed to federal preemption and Commerce Clause provisions, that not only that, but they have a binding contract every time a binding federal legal issue anyway when they are passing federal notes back and forth for an illegal substance on a federal level. So I've thought that Bitcoin would be an interesting alternative. If not Bitcoin, then bullion, would be an interesting alternative to trading for marijuana in medical marijuana dispensaries. But let me just play you a couple of things here. I want to just kind of illustrate what the whole issue is with Federal Reserve notes versus other types of currency, and what legal tender was in this country for 300 years, which has now been replaced with this Federal Reserve IOU. I'm going to play this from a news broadcast of a opponent to the Federal Reserve. And this is from several years ago. This is probably 10, 15 years old, but it's very good. What's said in here is relevant despite the time difference and the representatives that he's referring to.
Appropriately at the American Stock Exchange, Andrew Gause is the author of The Secret World of Money, the book, and he is also one of the strongest voices in the country for Federal Reserve reform. Also with us is Delos Smith. He's a senior analyst and economist at the Conference Board. Thank both of you gentlemen for coming to be on our show tonight. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, let me get to a quote first in the book, The Secret World of Money by Andrew Gause, and get you to comment on this quote. What it says here, and Rich, you listen to this too because you're a skeptic in all this. It says, the Federal Reserve estimates there are $597 billion outstanding in Federal Reserve notes. If we replace these with United States notes at a cost of 3 cents each, the annual interest savings would exceed $45 billion. Mr. Gause, what does that mean?
Well, simply put, these interest-bearing notes are representing the bonds. So if we replace Federal Reserve notes with United States notes, then we can use the Federal Reserve notes that we get in their stead and buy back $600 billion worth of bonds. The annual interest savings would be about $45 billion at current rates.
Okay, when you say Federal Reserve note, you're talking, I've got my wallet here and I'm pulling out a dollar bill. You're talking about these. This is a Federal Reserve note, right? It's written across the top.
That's correct.
And everything we carry is printed by this Federal Reserve organization, which is not a public organization. These are private banks that print this?
Each of the Federal Reserve banks are privately owned. The money is actually printed by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, which is under the Treasury Department. So technically, we still print the money, and I have no problem with that.
Right. But the private banks are authorizing the printing of this money.
That's right.
And they earn interest when the mint prints it.
Well, Thomas Jefferson put it best. He said, if a nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The thing that makes the bond good also makes the bill good, except that the bond benefits only those who issue it, where the bill benefits those who are directly involved with the labor.
Okay, so to see if I understand what you're saying, whenever we have debt and the government prints more money, what's happened is these private banks have authorized this printing of money. They put their name on it, Federal Reserve note, meaning private banks.
Correct.
And what happens is we as a people pay them interest on this money, which they haven't loaned us.
That's right. Yeah, the only way that money gets into circulation today is through the monetization of debt. Now, we all know that our government is a big issuer of debt, but private issuers also issue debt.
We're going to do our best to explain the process. It's actually not as complicated as you might think. You probably find it simpler than Rich. We'll find it. But let's take a look at some of the graphics to make things a little bit easier. We start here with Congress, who overspends. Each year we spend more money on things like salaries to military personnel, Social Security payments, building federal highways, everything you can imagine. We overspend money, and Congress got to make it up somehow. So, as we move to slide 2, what they do is they authorize the Treasury Department to print IOUs. They say, you can do this, print so many. There's our arrow there, and they give that authorization, and they print the IOUs. Moving to slide 3, what happens is then the Treasury Department sends these IOUs to the Federal Reserve banks. Now, they are private institutions, not government anymore. You see there, they're on the right. That's separating them from Congress and the Treasury Department. And those IOUs go to the Federal Reserve banks. Then we go to slide number 4, and what happens is the Federal Reserve banks then authorize the U.S. Mint to print what we hold in our wallets. Those are the Federal Reserve notes. Now, if you look at, stay on that slide for just a second. If you look at that, you can see the IOUs. These are Treasury bills, Treasury notes. There are various forms of IOU debt that have been given to the Federal Reserve banks. They stay now on that right side. These Federal Reserve banks now hold these notes and get interest on these notes when, in fact, they have provided nothing in the way of principal. They're just holding these notes, and now these private banks, have money that is yours and mine. Mr. Smith.
Well, I, of course, obviously don't agree with Andrew at all. That money is not owned by the Federal Reserve. It's owned by the United States government. It is Treasury property. It is true that the Federal Reserve Board oversees it for the Treasury, but the Treasury is in total control. Secretary Rubin is in control of that money, and it is part of the United States. The Federal Reserve acts as an agent of the United States
That's
Treasury.
That's a complete fallacy. The money of the United States are United States notes under Title 31, Section 5115. That is the money of the United States. Federal Reserve notes say on the top, Federal Reserve note, because they're a note of the Federal Reserve. If they weren't, then let's erase that and replace it with United States note, the way John Kennedy wanted to do, and then we would be on a sound money system. It would still be debt-based, but at least there would be no interest. Remember the words of Jefferson. What makes the bond good also makes the bill good. It's ludicrous to say you need a middleman in there to make sure everything's going all right.
And your point, Mr. Gause, is that the government, the U.S. government, issues this bond by which the Federal Reserve, rather, then authorizes the Federal Reserve notes, the money we carry.
That's right.
So if the credibility of the bond is what it's based on, why doesn't the government just print money on its own, as opposed to having this private banking organization doing the authorizing for it?
Absolutely. The most prominent United States note, and I have a sample of it, is a $2 note with Jefferson on the portrait. It is a red note. You've seen it, folks, and if you think about it, and I ask you, if you got your note tomorrow and it didn't say Federal Reserve note on it, it said United States note, would it be any less valuable to you? Would you not accept it as a note for $1 if it were a note from the United States? My question...
Go ahead.
Okay, the best way to put it is, if you had a checkbook, which is what our Treasury is, it is a checkbook, and you had the power to write checks that no one would ever cash, which is what our money is because it has no backing in gold. So you're allowed to create checks that no one would ever cash. Would you write them yourself, or would you give your checkbook to a friend, let him write the checks, and then borrow the checks back?
I have before me, before we get into the body of the program, three instruments, three notes. If you would be so kind as to tell the audience what they are now looking at.
That's a silver certificate. Now, that silver certificate limited the government in the amount of dollars that it could create by requiring that it had $1 silver on deposit in the Treasury for every one of those that it issued.
Now, at the very top of this dollar, if they can see it, what does it say at the very top?
Silver certificate.
It says silver certificate.
That's right.
If they take out of their pockets right now the dollar that is now in circulation, what does it say at the very top of the bill?
A Federal Reserve note.
Now, what we have in circulation now is a Federal Reserve note.
That's right. Instead of a certificate for $1, you have an IOU for $1. The interesting thing about it is it doesn't specify a promise to pay any specific thing at any specific time. So it's not even really an incomplete note. It's a note under color of law.
It is a promissory note?
That's correct.
It is an instrument of debt.
It is absolutely an instrument of debt.
And when this bill is printed that we think is $1, it creates debt.
That's exactly right.
Now, this dollar that is no longer in circulation, that says it is a silver certificate.
Correct.
When it is minted, when it is circulated or printed, it creates wealth.
That's right. It represents wealth that's already been created in the form of the silver dollar or a gold dollar in the case of a gold certificate.
All right. Now, I have one other note here, and this note says at the very top, this is a $5 bill, but at the top it says United States note.
That's right. Yeah, you've heard it said we owe the money to ourselves. Well, that is true. But the reality is that the only way that a regular dollar that we know as a dollar gets into circulation is when the Federal Reserve creates it and then loans it to someone.
This says, what note does this say now?
United States note. The critical difference here is that...
Now, this dollar says what kind of note? Federal
Reserve note. Now,
what's the difference in the dollar, the bill that's called a dollar that's circulated now that says Federal Reserve note,
right,
and the bill that used to be circulated saying United States note?
The United States note benefits no one except the people of the United States. The Federal Reserve note benefits the Federal.
And there you go. That's my contention there, is that, you know, we are benefiting the banks and not the people when we're using these Federal Reserve notes. Plus, it gives the federal government as well as the Federal Reserve more reign over the people than they had previously. The reason that John F. Kennedy was shot and killed, and This took place not much before he was murdered by the Federal Reserve, by the bankers, on June 4th, 1963. A virtually unknown presidential decree, Executive Order 11110, was signed with the authority to basically strip the bank of its power to loan money to the United States federal government at interest. With the stroke of a pen, President Kennedy declared that the privately owned Federal Reserve Bank would soon be out of business. The Christian Law Fellowship exhaustively researched the matter through the Federal Register and the Library of Congress. We can now safely conclude that this executive order has never been repealed, amended, or superseded by any subsequent federal or executive order. In simple terms, it is still valid. Anyway, I got this from John F. Kennedy.net. And then if you want to go right to this article, type a / thefederalreserve.htm. And I'll put these links at the bottom of the video. This video will be on YouTube at my channel, xcannabiscom, and it will also be a blog post at xcannabis.com. And there's going to be a lot of different references here because this is a pretty complicated subject, and I wanted to give you guys all of the reference points. Basically, the Federal Reserve is illegal, under the Constitution from the original format to what we have now. And with this federal, with this presidential executive order 11110, and I think that they have so much power. Money is power, and they have so much of it, and it's ours. But they're taking it and making us pay interest on it. They're taking it in the form of debt from us, but they have so much of it. They have so much power that they can override executive orders of the president. And they have, obviously. And I don't know, a bunch of thieves and liars. So, to wrap the show up, I'm going to play Ministry, song called Thieves. My mom got me this CD when I was 14 years old, and I played it probably non-stop for a week and a half straight, at full blast whenever I could. Probably the reason why I stopped living at their house. They probably didn't take too well to that. Anyway, let me play this for you.
we're going to tear this motherfucker down.
One more thing I was thinking of before I wrap the show up is, I was listening to Mike Cann, I forget his show, but anyway, Mike Cann out in Boston was making some good points about why we should not vote for Mitt Romney or Barack Obama. I mean, there's a small community here in the cannabis community, and it's obvious that Barack Obama, for, his example, is going to win in Massachusetts. There's just no doubt. And so, I mean, that's what his philosophy is. So why not give as many votes as possible to Gary Johnson? And his explanation, his reasoning, and it makes sense. I don't know if I agree with it 100%, but his reasoning is that if Gary Johnson gets at least 5% of the vote, that they will get federal matching of funds in the next election in 2016. But if he doesn't get 5%, then the party is going to be underfunded. It's going to be competing with the giants that, it's hard to compete with. And he'll end up being in the same predicament as Ron Paul over and over again, just like Ron Paul has faced in the last, 3 presidential runs that he's given. So thanks to Ron Paul, thanks to Gary Johnson, thanks for all you liberty-minded folks and you conscious observers of this monetary system. This commodity report has been given to you today by xcannabis.com. I'm Reverend Ryan signing out. Take care and peace, pot, and liberty.